Good evening, everyone. Is the sound okay? Yeah, okay. So for this evening, well, first, congratulations. We've been here 24 hours. And so it may feel like a lot longer for some and like a snap of the fingers for others. Regardless, I think it's still a feat, an accomplishment not to be underestimated. For this evening, what I want to talk about is maybe in some ways just kind of point to what is already happening, whether you know it or not, as we practice together, while at the same time pointing to some things that you might want to pay attention to. The way that I kind of imagine it, it's like we're going down a path. It's like me saying, hey, there's a trail over there. Have you seen it? And then you go check it out. And then you maybe recall that when I say, hey, have you seen that trail? About a quarter mile in, you might notice when you look to your right, this vista. So try to remember that. And then a little further down, there's this like beautiful tree and this rock, and you won't miss it. So that's kind of like what I want this evening to feel like, that I'm just pointing to a trail that is unfolding as you just simply walk down it, while at the same time being like, hey, if you notice this, or try to notice that. And so I mentioned that so that, I don't know, you don't take in anything I say as like, what? Is that supposed to be happening? Or something like that. Or I'm doing it all wrong. Or for there to feel like you need to grasp or change anything or force something to happen. So instead, I'm upfront inviting you to take this talk in with this openness, this curiosity. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll look out for that. Thanks. As Gulu and Yang already spoke about beautifully, we're coming together and we're taking refuge. And this expression, taking refuge, is this figurative meaning that refers to a kind of spiritual security. We might know of refuge in many ways, like when it's pouring rain and we don't have our umbrella or rain gear on, we might want to run under a tree or a shelter. Maybe if there's a tornado or something, we want to take shelter in a basement. So taking refuge in that way, that's for the body. And then the question becomes, where can we go to shelter from the difficulties and dangers of the heart? Where can the mind take shelter? And so that's what we're doing here. And I loved how Gulu described it yesterday. It's like a wildlife refuge. And I asked him to remind me of what he said yesterday. And so he said, a wildlife refuge is a place where animals can thrive, and refuge in the triple gem allows many beautiful qualities of the heart to grow and thrive. Refuge generally is a place of safety where we can relax, feel at ease, feel happiness, belonging, or whatever we seek from practice. And so I want to also just point out that, yeah, we're coming together and we're practicing, and there's this teaching team here, but there's so many people that are most likely unseen to you that are helping this feel like a refuge for you, because they care so deeply about the qualities of the heart and mind and about you cultivating the qualities of the heart and mind, that are contributing to this container. So it's like the kitchen staff, the caretakers of the land, the facilities, the people in registration, like everyone basically, at Spirit Rock. And then I also think of all of the people who have come through and practiced in this very hall over decades, infusing this place with presence and power for us to kind of continue riding on so that we can continue taking refuge. It's yearning for refuge that often brings people to practice in the first place. It's this responsiveness to this fundamental human need. And again, to use Gulu's words, where we can relax, where there's safety, feel at ease, happiness, belonging. And so we're doing this together this week, and there's this power in coming together. One of our teachers here, Erin Treat, she says, when we come together and we take refuge together, it's like a safe fire with many logs, a brightness, a force of nature. And we can draft off each other's practices in a certain way, enough to produce a warmth that we can feel together. So you might already be feeling that. Or if you're not, and you're just kind of like slugging through the day because there could be sleepiness or agitation, or you're still wondering, like, what does that bell mean? What time is lunch? Or, whatever. You might bring to mind, what would you be doing if you weren't here? Or would you be meditating as many hours as you are in the day if there was only you in this big hall? Probably not. And you might be doing other things like scrolling or, online shopping or whatever if you weren't here. And so there's already this draft that we're riding from each other's practice. And then what we're doing, I mentioned it a little bit yesterday, we're coming together for this practice of Vipassana. But in particular, we're practicing samasati, which can be translated as wise mindfulness. And it's this quality of attention that's developed in the service of freedom. This freedom from suffering for ourselves and others. And it's not this kind of mindfulness so that we can just do something better, which is sometimes what some people do with their practice or with mindfulness. Ajahn Chah, Thai Forest master, sometimes talks about practice as walking into a hurricane. And for some of you, you're just like, oh, totally true. After 24 hours, you already feel that. And so, or if you haven't felt that, it's not necessarily going to happen. But just to say that when you might hear this Thai forest master say, oh, practice is like walking into a hurricane, you might ask yourself, why would I do that? Why would we do that? But I think you're already touching into this, that it's basically to understand the winds that might otherwise push and pull us, that might control or dictate our lives without us knowing, like birth and loss, praise and blame, pleasure and pain. And so we do this, we walk into this hurricane, we orient our hearts and minds towards this quality samasati so that we can be grounded, centered, collected, steady, despite the winds that might push and pull us. Our practice, in a lot of ways, starts on this personal level. We might come to practice because we hear or think it'll be good for us. We're stressed, or we don't sleep well, or we have pain, something like that. And so someone tells us probably that mindfulness would be good for us, or we read it somewhere. And so it's often through mindfulness we come to this practice. And then eventually we begin to see suffering in some way, whether it's physical suffering, emotional suffering. Then we get to know it. And then we eventually begin to see our role in the suffering as well. And then from there, we can begin to start touching into these moments of freedom where we're free from suffering, even if they're small moments. And then we begin to shift from being ruled by the mind to start using it as a skillful tool. And again, this is already happening for you. You don't have to mentally note, okay, mindfulness first, no suffering second, recognize my role in it, et cetera, et cetera. You don't have to do that. It's unfolding already. And it's going to keep unfolding in deeper and deeper ways, regardless of how long or how little you've practiced. And yet in Buddhist teachings, mindfulness alone is not enough. So just wanting to point to that it's often paired with another mental quality, sampajanya, which means clear comprehension. And so when we pair it together, it's actually sati sampajanya, which is mindfulness and clear comprehension. And again, we've already been inviting you to do this. And so what that means is to add to the bare awareness, so the quality of attention that you're already bringing to watching your breath or paying attention to the sensations in your body, or as Kitasaru invited us to do, to pay attention to when we eat, et cetera, et cetera. But then to bring to it this element of understanding. We need to know not only what we're doing as we're doing it, but also this underlying motivation that we're doing it with. And eventually, once we start seeing this underlying motivation, we begin to see whether it's skillful or unskillful, wholesome or unwholesome, or I like to say helpful or unhelpful, and then helpful for what, or unhelpful for what, well, leading to less suffering for myself and others now and in the future. So it's not just for myself now, and it's not just for myself in the future, but it's those four, for myself and others now and in the future. In a conversation with Adam today, he told me that Gil Fronsdale, another teacher that sometimes teaches here at Spirit Rock and a little more south in California, will translate sati. So sati, S-A-T-I, as I mentioned, is often translated as mindfulness, but Gil translates it as awareness. And he says that secular mindfulness is referring to sati sampajanya. So secular mindfulness is what asks us to be mindful with clear comprehension. But that the Buddha didn't tell us to be mindful, but that mindfulness is a result of awareness. And that we don't have to be mindful, we just have to be aware and open. And I really appreciated that because, I don't know, maybe we can even try this as a little experiment, and I hope this works the way that it works in my body. But I don't know, just as you sit here or lay here, turn your attention to your body and just notice what sensations might come up when you hear the two different words. And so the first word, mindfulness. Mindfulness. And then awareness. Awareness. And then you can open your eyes if you feel like it. You can also keep them closed. And so for me, it was quite interesting to tune into it because mindfulness, it's like a word that I hear and say all the time. And I never really paid attention to how it felt, especially in comparison to another word. And so kind of mindfulness was like, yeah, mindfulness. But then when I heard awareness, there was just this dropping and opening, like this spaciousness. Did anyone else feel that? Okay, 6 people. Okay, a little more. Yeah, and so I just really appreciated that that conversation with Adam, just that how even a simple shift in a word that we might take for granted, mindfulness we hear all the time, I feel, or at least in this self-selecting group of folks, we might hear it a lot. And so just that it might actually be more like awareness, and that mindfulness is a result of being aware. The Pali word sati also has a meaning of remembering or recollecting. And it's not so much about remembering or recollecting about the past, but it's this remembering to be present. But also it's this remembering of that it's held within this body of the Buddhist teachings. That our quality of mindfulness that we're trying to cultivate here is in service of freedom. Freedom from suffering. And so it's both this remembering to be present, but that also it's part of this big body of teachings, and it's actually in service of freedom. And this remembering to be present, that's what we're practicing. And that's the part that might feel a little more effortful, because it's really easy to be mindless or to have lapses of mindfulness. But maybe think of it as a spectrum, that it's not like this on or off switch, but that sometimes there's a little bit more mindfulness, a little more interest or curiosity, and at other times a little less. Sometimes it could feel like none at all. And so you might actually play with it and think of it more as like this dimmer switch versus this on or off. Like I was mindful, good, check. Mindful, bad. Mindless, bad. And it's not as simple as that. And then this remembering or recollecting could be this sense of gathering, of unifying, centering, collecting back together from perhaps our more usual state of scatteredness, distractedness, and so on. So that's another way we can think of this quality of sati. But what you should know is that this mind, and all of our minds, when given the correct conditions, will naturally settle. And so there's no need to force it. Now, I think just simply by being here, not having all of the stimulants that we usually have, the screens and all the different sounds and different people we may come across and talk to, and the speed at which we do things, and all of that stuff, not having that, and not even as simple as not even needing to think, what am I going to eat? Do I have the ingredients? Do I have to cook it? And so there's already, again, so much of the conditions that are coming together to create this refuge, actually, that can allow for more conditions to be set so that the mind can naturally settle. So if it doesn't feel like it's settling yet, it's only been 24 hours. Give it time. And I don't know if it'll ever feel like you've reached the point where it's settled, because I think we get kind of used to the new normal, and then sometimes the way mindfulness works is it becomes so acute that it becomes quicker at noticing when the mind wanders, and then sometimes that feels like it's really not settling, but it's simply we're noticing more. So it's kind of ironic like that. But basically that no one is born with a mind that doesn't know any settling at all or that can't settle. There are all kinds of minds, and they all settle given the correct conditions for those minds. And so we're just experimenting with what are the right conditions that we can create that will allow this mind and heart and body to settle at this time. And one of the ways, as you've been doing, and we'll keep reminding you in different ways over the week, is that you find this sensory experience or this anchor, and you rest your awareness on that experience. And the idea or the hope or the invitation is to stay with it as much as you can. However, it might feel like you might need to stay with it or remind yourself or remember to stay with your anchor a few billion times. And I think there was this, I saw it as like the 4-step Zen instruction to meditation. And it was something like, choose an anchor, place your attention on it, and notice, wait, that's going to be 5 steps. Choose an anchor and place your attention on it. Notice when your mind has wandered. Step 3 is when the mind has wandered, place your attention back to your anchor. And step 4 is repeat 2 to 3 billion times. And so we stay with it as much as we can. And then try to notice when the mind will go out because, or when the mind wanders, because that's part of how our minds have been conditioned or have evolved to keep us safe. And it could also be fun to notice things and to have ideas. So it's enjoyable, and the mind also needs to rest. So it's both of those. And so we bring the awareness back to our anchor as a way to teach the mind that going out or wandering can be beautiful, and coming in is also beautiful and needed. And so how we practice is important. As Yang guided us this morning, and so bringing in these qualities of ease and patience, permission and spaciousness, rest, no pressure, not rushing. And so we're not just trying to cultivate samadhi or concentration, nor are we necessarily separating, like samadhi is a wisdom practice, and then there's, being kind and easeful and bringing in metta or loving kindness, and those are heart practices. We're not separating the two, but rather, how can we practice in a way where they're the same thing, basically? So this is from another one of our teachers here at Spirit Rock, Kate Johnson, good friend of ours as well. So Kate says, we also cultivate samadhi because the gathered mind is a powerful mind, and we need to build power at this time. This is a time in our collective experience where those of us who are awake and awakening need to build power. That's what I believe our ancestors want for us. That's what I believe our descendants want for us. The kind of power that can affect change. The kind of power that can see clearly. The kind of power that we recover when we recover our attention from all of the distractions that are available to us. So that's why we do it. And it's simple, and it can be boring, and it could also be rich and vivid and surprising. And so we build this kind of power. We need to do this sort of practice, to slow down, to take refuge, get presence, bring heart. Tanisra said last night something along the lines of, while we may want systemic change without the shifts of consciousness to inform those changes, however high their ideal, we will repeat the same patterns. So basically, the work of profound transformation is deeply informed by this inner work of transforming our own hearts and minds. And so really emphasizing the how and not so much the what. There's this time, and I think it happened for years, where I got instructions from my teacher, and it was simply something like, pay attention to your breath, and when the mind wanders, bring it back. It was when I was practicing in Thailand, and we had 5-minute meetings with our teacher. There was no Dharma talks or anything like that. And so that's all I had, that instruction. And so I want to do it well. And so I did that. Every time my mind wandered, I noticed it and I brought it back. And then it ended up being kind of like playing whack-a-mole. So it's like the mind wandered, tack, bring it back. And then, and I kept doing that over and over, 2 to 3 billion times a day. And then what I wasn't noticing was that even though I was doing what my teacher told me, I wasn't paying attention to how I was doing it. And I didn't know I was a new practitioner. And so I practiced like that for years, actually. And the only reason why I realized that there was this issue with the how I was practicing was because my partner at that time and my mom were really afraid of me. They were just like, you're so mean. You're so impatient. You lose your temper with us, et cetera, et cetera. And then I naturally reacted defensively and said, you don't know anything about this practice and you're accused, just like totally defensive. But then what's pretty powerful with this practice, I continued and their words stayed with me. And I thought, even though I was good at that time at like sitting really still for long periods of time and being really slow in my formal walking practice, that's not actually what I was practicing for. I wasn't practicing so that I could be really slow or really still, because those weren't skills that were necessarily very adaptable to the world. And I wasn't planning to become a monastic or anything like that. And so that's when I started tuning into how I was practicing. And at that time, I think I was doing something intense as I do anything, which is like practicing, I think, 2 hours at least a day. And so then I cut it down to like 40 minutes or something like that. And then I tried to focus more on like quality over quantity. And it took many years for me to start being gentle to myself in my practice. And I think of something Sharon Salzberg says, where the moment we notice that our mind has wandered, that's the magic moment. And I'm not sure what she meant by that, because as soon as I heard that, I kind of went into my own thinking and thought that makes total sense to me, because it's in that moment I or we can see whether we're really embodying the qualities or the values we care about. Because if it doesn't start with us, then where's it going to start? And so I was practicing to cultivate some of these beautiful qualities that we might know of, like patience and ease and loving kindness and generosity. But I wasn't doing that with myself in my practice. And then as soon as my timer went off, the same demands I was putting on myself, I was putting on those around me. And so just to, pay attention to that magic moment or the how we're practicing or how you're practicing. Not just what. The title of our retreat is The Reclamation of the Sacred, Journey into Refuge, Presence, and Love. And just to say that even though in our subtitle it says Journey into Refuge, Presence, and Love, it's not a journey in the sense that on day 1 and 2, you'll understand and embody refuge. Okay. Then on day 3 and 4, it's going to be presence, et cetera, love, It's not like that. But I like to think of this as more, can the invitation be in every session, in everything that you do this week? Have it be this grand old experiment. However fast or slow you might be moving, however much or little mindfulness might be present, whether you're in a room full of others or alone in your room or the bathroom, can you bring in all 3 of these qualities? And what I find helpful is to think of embodying these qualities. So not to be thinking too much like, okay, is refuge here, is presence here, is love here? Because then it can feel kind of like robotic or performative. But you might slow things down and think, okay, can I lift this thing up with refuge, with love, with presence? Can I lean forward? Can I strike the bell? Or can I lift my fork or eat my food? Taking refuge in the community that has brought this food in front of me, with presence and appreciation and with love. For everything. Could even be, like this is my mind on retreats, even when you're in the bathroom reading the toilet paper cover for the 10th time. Anyone? Is that just me? You might then start, instead of looking for a distraction, you might think of like, oh, thank you to all of the trees and the people and the sun, the wind, the water that allows me to have this toilet paper. It could be something as simple as that. But to try to bring refuge, presence, and love into all that you do and to embody it. A lot of our practice is to gently guide. And really the emphasis there is the gently guide. And I like to think of like the gentle nudge kind of thing. Not to force, not to strive. And the thing is, I hope you believe me. Mostly because when I first started practicing, that's what teachers would tell me. And I didn't really believe them. So it's like, save yourself 10 years and a lot of suffering and try to believe what we tell you. But at the same time, you'll have to see for yourself. But this practice is so special, and it's so unlike anything we've done, no matter how long you've been practicing. And I think in every moment or every day you come to the practice, it's like you're learning something new. And I'm on my 3rd or 4th time trying to learn the ukulele. And despite not knowing more than like 3 chords, I still have fun in it. And I think it's thanks to this practice. And I think it's maybe a result of having, struggled so much in this practice for many, many years of not believing my teachers to bring in some ease or rest or to focus on how. And so I think, to use this image of the ukulele still, it's like I could approach it being hard on myself, thinking like, oh God, how many ukuleles did you buy? 2? How many lessons have you like paid for? And have you, I could kind of be hard on myself in that way. I could get so tense and afraid of getting it wrong. I could bring this tension to any time I pick up the ukulele, which is not often these days, but so much so that I'm unable to hear the playfulness and the joy in each string that actually brought me to choose the ukulele. And so to again bring in this openness, this awareness to anything that we do. From the Anguttara Nikaya, some of you might know this, but the Buddha says to Sona, "What do you think, Sona? When you were still a layman, weren't you a good player of the arched harp?" "Yes, sir." When your harp strings were tuned too tight, was it resonant and playable? No, sir. When your harp strings were tuned too slack, was it resonant and playable? No, sir. But when your harp strings were tuned neither too tight nor too slack, but fixed at an even tension, was it resonant and playable? Yes, sir. In the same way, Sona, when energy is too forceful, it leads to restlessness. When energy is too slack, it leads to laziness. So, Sona, you should focus on energy and serenity. Find a balance of the faculties and learn the pattern of this situation. Or in other words, and from Kittisaro, I think this was from last year, being well with what comes and goes leads to freedom. A lot gets solved with a willingness to be with ourselves. And so we can't force what you're doing already. So again, this is already happening. You are creating the conditions for mindfulness to happen, for this embodiment of refuge, presence, and love to happen. You can't force it. You can't say like, "Oh, that was a great talk. So maybe tomorrow when I wake up, I'm gonna, turn it all on, turn on the light switch, mindfulness, refuge, presence, etc." But no, of course you can't. And it's kind of like trying to force a flower to open before it's ready. If you try and do that, you'll break it. And so you can feed it, you can water it, you can give it sun, even prune it, but you can't make it bloom. It does that on its own. So it's the same with your heart and your mind. And so maybe to illustrate it, and I'm going to use my hands, so if your eyes are closed, you can either try and follow along or look in my direction. But sometimes we come to practice and we're wound up, because there's a lot of stuff going on in our life. And then when we come to practice, and it could be as early as on day one, which is where you're at, we might hear of these beautiful qualities, or we might be reminded of them when we come into the space. And so then we take our practice and we're trying to pry ourselves open. We're trying to make ourselves not sleepy, not have pain, and to be mindful and to be loving already, not annoyed with the neighbor who's, closing their door too loud or whatever it might be. And so we're trying to force and force and force. And then we might get disappointed that it's not happening. Or you might have come here and you thought, okay, I have a week to solve this issue in my relationship or in my workplace or whatever it might be. And so we do the same thing. We try and open, we try and get it kind of solved and all tidied up, hopefully by next Saturday. But instead what we're doing is we want to take our practice and just hold what's here already. And then allow, through our practice, through our showing up, through our sincere intention, for the conditions to be created so that this opening and this softening happens on its own. And so this week we'll also chant the 4 heart qualities. And in one of them we'll chant about equanimity. And equanimity in some ways, at least in this like maybe trying to force open, can mean letting go of things needing to happen the way we think it should look like and on the timeline we've decided upon in advance. And when we're able to let go of that, then we start waking up to the subtle. And then when we start waking up to the subtle, and again, this is happening already, then we start waking up to the sacred. And then when we wake up to the sacred, it leads to the reclamation of the sacred. Sometimes I think of us as we come to practice as these snow globes. And that when we come to practice or we come to retreat, we're these snow globes that are all shaken up. And actually, that's usually how we kind of go about our lives, that we don't realize it because there's just a lot of movement and action. So we're kind of like constantly shaken up. So much so that we start thinking that the blizzard inside the snow globe is just kind of normal and natural. And that our thoughts and opinions that are the snowflakes, it's like that's who we are because it's all just like this blizzard inside the snow globe. But then when we come to practice, it's like we're slowing down and we're setting that snow globe down. And depending on an innumerable amount of conditions, there will be settling. But complete settling is not necessarily the goal. But I think any amount of settling is worthy. Because then what starts to happen is that the snowflakes in the snow globe begin to slow down. Some begin to settle. And then we start seeing the spaces in between the snowflakes. And then we can start touching into, wait a second, I am not my thoughts and opinions, but actually I'm the spaces between them. And then they begin to settle even more. And then what gets revealed is what is already there. And that's what's already happening. What gets revealed is this steady heart and this mind. So those were just some of the reflections I want to share. You're already walking down the path. So every now and then look left, look right to see some of these invitations. You don't have to make any of it happen. It's already happening. So let's just maybe turn the gaze downward or close the eyes. Let whatever words that want to land on the heart, let them land. Whatever words float away that you want to grasp, you can get them in the recording later. And just trust that you got what you needed. In a poem, The Choice for Love by Emmanuel. What does the voice of fear whisper to you? Fear speaks to you in logic and reason. It assumes the language of love itself. Fear tells you, I want to make you safe. Love says, you are safe. Fear says, give me symbols, give me frozen images, give me something I can rely on. Loving truth says, only give me this moment. Fear would walk you on a narrow path, promising to take you where you want to go. Love says, open your arms and fly with me. Every moment of your life, you are offered the opportunity to choose love or fear, to tread the earth or to soar the heavens. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for being here, for walking this, or for journeying with us. Right now, it is a walking period. And then if someone can ring the bell at 10:02, and then we'll come back in here for one of our last formal practices for the evening. Yeah. Thank you, dear ones.